Welcome to Scigest, your fortnightly serving of digestible science from plant and food research.
Kia ora, I'm James Sainsbury and welcome to another Science Life for Me episode where we talk to scientists about their career thus far. This is my first rodeo as a podcaster and I'm looking forward to bringing you some of our great science stories out of Ruakura. But first up, I have had the excellent opportunity to speak to entomologist Anna Kokeny about herself and her science. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
All right, to get us started, could you tell us about your current position and location within plant and food research?
Yeah, sure. So I work as a research associate at Hawke's Bay Plant and Food Research Site, and I work as part of the temperate fruit crop entomology team. So I've been there for past 7 years now, coming up 8 years next March. So yeah, it's been a good opportunity.
Terrific. So can you tell us what a typical day as Anna Kokeny in Hawke's Bay looks like at Plant and Food Research?
So it's a really good question. It really depends on what time of the year it is. So as a research associate, you're involved in a lot of different projects. And during the season, which is anywhere from late September, we tend to prepare for fieldwork coming up. And so most of the time from September until the end of March, we spend a lot of time out in the field collecting data for all sorts of different trials. And so that kind of sums up our field work. And then once we've collected all the data during the autumn and winter months, we tend to, summarise what we've done, see what the results are and figure out where to go forward and what proposals to put in for the next season. Yeah.
And so pest population monitoring and reducing those pest populations is a broad theme in the work that you do?
Yeah, so over the last 7 years, I've worked quite a lot with all sorts of insect pests, but mainly pests of apples and primarily codling moth and apple leaf curling midge, which we definitely don't want in our apples. And New Zealand exports to Asian markets, so we do a lot of export to Japan and Taiwan, and they pay quite good money to have clean apples that are residue-free, pest-free, and of course you can imagine that's quite a difficult task, but a lot of my work involves trying to find various ways of controlling them without necessarily calendar spraying. And yeah, it's been a good opportunity to learn more about those pest species. Yeah.
That sounds like a huge and worthwhile topic to be spending your time on.
Yes, yeah, it's been a good few years. I've been very fortunate to have worked with a lot of mentors, so scientists that have worked in the industry for a long time. So Jim Walker and Peter Lowe, Dave Rogers, they've been at Plant and Food for a while and they've got such an extensive knowledge base that someone like me coming in brand new, it was just the perfect opportunity for me to try and pick up everything I can while they've been here. And two of them have retired, but it's been really good to have worked with them, and I'm very grateful for the team that I was part of till this day.
So that's a typical day of Anna Kokeny in 2024. But going back to the beginning, you were born in Hungary, just outside Budapest, as the daughter of parents who had experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall and spent the first 9 years of your life in post-Soviet Eastern Europe. So how did that person, with a childhood speaking Hungarian and enjoying goulash, turn into a research associate at Plant and Food Research in New Zealand?
That's a really good question. I tend to struggle when people ask me, where are you from? Because it's such an interesting one to answer. Part of me wants to say, yeah, I'm from Hawke's Bay because I've lived there for 7 years. Another part of me wants to say I'm from Hungary, but everyone, that can lead to a bigger conversation. So seeing as you've asked, yes, I am from Hungary, and that definitely plays a big role in my life. I still, till this day, identify as Hungarian, and that'll always be part of my life. But I often almost forget because I sound Kiwi. A lot of people don't know that side of me. And so, especially now, I guess that I'm in a science role and I'm expanding, I'm always looking for ways to bring my culture into my role, and if there's opportunities in Europe to do work with Hungarians, that's something that would interest me. But going back to my childhood, yeah, we moved to New Zealand when I was roughly 10, and so I had to learn how to speak English, which was at the time very challenging, but looking back, you're so young that you just absorb everything around you. So fortunately, I didn't have to do a lot of work, whereas my parents, who were mid-30s at the time, their work was really cut out for them and just settling into a new culture. And it's something I can't even imagine doing right now. being almost a similar age, to go to a different country and learn a different language, it's hard, yeah.
So you left in 2004 when you were 10, and where did you settle when you first arrived in New Zealand? How did that all work?
Yeah, so interestingly, we moved to Gisborne. My dad had a good friend of his who suggested to try New Zealand. Gisborne came up as an opportunity, and yeah, I have very fond memories of that place. And so we lived there for almost a year and a half. But ultimately, I think my parents had planned to move to Canada. I'm not quite sure why, but my dad was doing their work there in the past. And so after moving to Gisborne for a year and a half, I picked up a bit of English, so did they. We thought, right, we'll continue the journey, and we moved to Toronto in Canada. And after about 6 months of time there, spending some time there, my parents thought, why not just come back to New Zealand? It suited their lifestyle better, and we came back to Hamilton.
And so you completed your secondary education in Hamilton?
Yes. Yep.
And then it was off to university in Auckland?
Yeah, so after we came back to Hamilton, I went to high school here and then thought, right, what's my next steps? And that was quite interesting because for a long time, I guess I wasn't sure what path I wanted. As you do when you're young, you're thinking about your options and what you want to be when you're older. And biology was always an interest of mine. But I actually initially went to uni to study psychology. And little did I know that I'll end up where I am now.
So that leads nicely into my next question, which is that you ended your university career with a master's thesis titled Nesting Ecology and Habitat Requirements of New Zealand Ground Nesting Solitary Bees. And we'll get to the solitary bees in a minute. But as you said, ecology wasn't your first port of call at university, it was psychology. And what was the motivation to start there, and then what triggered the switch to a slightly different topic?
That's a great question. For some reason, I really gravitated towards a career where I could work with people. That's something that a lot of people say, a lot of people are good at working with others and talking to them. But that's definitely one of my passions in life, is just getting below a surface level conversation. I like getting to know a bit deeper, and I guess I just had that interest in helping people in that sense. So I thought, right, psychology's maybe the path for me. And my first 3 years, I've kept that as my primary focus with biology in the background. So I did a double major just to give me that opportunity to still study something that I'm interested in, but also pursuing psychology. And then after my third year, that was kind of a pivot point, and I thought, okay, you kind of have to make a decision now. What are you going to stick to? And ultimately, I ended up going with biology, down the biology path, and postgraduate diploma in biosecurity and conservation. So that's kind of what triggered my journey in science and what led to where I am now. So after that, I don't know, do you want me to go into detail?
I was gonna say that, as you're aware, I'm a member of the bee biology and productivity team here at Ruakura, and so obviously have a soft spot for all things bee related. What was your first introduction to New Zealand's ground nesting solitary bees?
Yeah, so after I finished my postgrad diploma, I ended up working with James Sainsbury. You might know him. So I did an internship with him. So that came up after my fourth year. It was a summer season, and I worked alongside him, and I really enjoyed. He was looking at pollinator diversity and ecosystem services, things I had no idea about at the time. You broadly know about insects and pollinators, but nothing in more depth, and that really opened my eyes to the world of insects, pollinators, and I thought, wow, I could really see myself becoming interested in the topic. And so after I worked a field season with him, he suggested to talk to his supervisor, who's Dr. Jacqueline Biggs. She's up at Auckland University, and to try and see if there's an opportunity for me to do my master's. So I think that prompted me to do my master's and to study native bees. And so I think it was discussions with Jacqueline that she said that there's a bit of a knowledge gap in that area, and would I be interested? And I said, yeah, why not? And that's kind of what led to my master's project.
That's terrific. And, New Zealand's native bees are very special. but they're also not that well known outside entomological circles. So how common are they? How many species do we have? And what's your favourite fact about New Zealand's native bees?
Yeah, so I think they're more common than people realise, but it's just knowing where to look for them. So because they nest in the ground, they have quite specific requirements, and unless you kind of know about them, people often mistake them for flies. And it's been really cool actually being able to point out situations where you've walked past on a hike somewhere and you say, oh, that's a native bee, and people go, wow, I didn't even know that. So I think native bees are quite common. We just might not know or appreciate them enough yet, but there's always room for improvement, and I can definitely see our knowledge gaps are being filled, and people are more aware of them nowadays. So from my understanding, there are 28 native bee species. You probably know about this too, but yeah, so 28 native bee species, and the one I worked on was a genus called Lioproctus, and they have 18 species, I believe, and they're a little bit bigger than their smaller brother and sister, who without getting too technical, they're called Lasioglossum. So they're teeny little tiny bees, but Lioproctus, the one that I did my master's on, is quite a large bee that looks like a fly.
And can they sting like honeybees?
I believe they can, but not to the same extent. From my experience, I've never been stung, so even if they can, I don't think that's something that's the same with honeybees, which is great because it's a big fear that a lot of people have. And they're quite interesting because they tend to aggregate in groups, and so they tend to stick together but do their own thing. So they're solitary, meaning they're alone, but they like to be neighbours to each other, and that's what I found really fascinating, and that's what I was interested in, just try and study and find out what is it that their requirements are when they pick the soil and say, oh, this looks really comfortable, I'll go there. And yeah, how can we promote them?
That is terrific. So just like humans, solitary, but like to be in a community.
Exactly, yeah. Or sometimes I think they even refer to as semi-social, kind of like bumblebees, I believe. Yeah, similar aspects.
Terrific. So that was all wrapped up in your master's thesis. And then what was the next step? What was your first position in science after you'd graduated?
Yes, so I graduated, I remember it was December 2016. And so, of course, we had Christmas around the corner, and my first thought was, right, let's apply for jobs, see what's out there. And I was up in Auckland, living up in Auckland at the time, and applied for a couple of roles, and the one in Hawke's Bay came up. And that was, I think, end of January, I came down for an interview, and I actually didn't know I'd be working as an entomologist, because it's really interesting. Nowadays, I think people, you know, if you don't do a particular profession, like you're a pilot, your options are quite open depending on what you study. So I remember my dad always asking me, so what are you going to actually be once you finish your degree? And I said, well, I don't know. It depends what role I'm gonna get. My options are a little bit, it's not as clear, I think, as with some other professions. So anyway, long story short, I applied for some roles, and this one came up in Hawke's Bay, working as part of the entomology team. And I remember going down there on a beautiful sunny day, classic Hawke's Bay, and I thought, wow, I could really see myself living here. It wasn't even really on my radar before then. And I knew that people were interviewing for the role. There were a couple of people, so I said to myself, don't get your hopes up if you don't get it, but it will be really cool. And before I knew it, I got the call, and yeah, I was successful. So I started my next journey and moved from Auckland down to Hawke's Bay.
I guess that was an interesting question that your dad asked you, and an interesting observation about, you know, sometimes when you do a general degree, there's not a fixed career path. So would that be a good descriptor of what your career path has been, rather than being a very planned, scheduled, goal-orientated endpoint? Absolutely.
I feel like my entire studies from university has just been one door opening after another. So one thing leading to another. I have a rough idea, but then sometimes things prop up and you pivot and you change. And I think that's something that can be difficult in life unless you know exactly what you want to do. Sometimes things do crop up and you just have to take those opportunities. And that's definitely something that I've I've learned to embrace, because it can be kind of scary, the unknown, when you don't know what your next step is going to be. But at the end of the day, things always tend to work out as long as you're open to options and how keen you are to do whatever it is that you're interested in. Eventually it always works out. So I'm very pleased with where I guess my career has led me, and I would have never thought, if you'd asked me at 16, what are you going to do when you grow up? I wouldn't even know what entomologist is, let alone be working in the field for almost 8 years. So it's just interesting how life works out.
It really is. And how would you summarise all of that as advice for a young person that's 16 or 17 that has science sort of on the horizon as a possibility?
I think my journey so far, from what I've learned, is that, first of all, I would probably say, think about the kind of lifestyle that you would want. I'd encourage everyone to study science purely because I'm biased and I think it's a fantastic field. But yeah, encourage them to think about the lifestyle that they want. Do they like outdoor work, indoor work? Do they mind lab work? Because it all determines what field you're going to end up in. I wouldn't necessarily tell everyone, just go to uni to go to university, because as fantastic as it is to get a tertiary education, and it's a privilege, I also think sometimes it's not for everybody. But if you have an interest in science, I would highly encourage anybody to talk to people, and to even maybe go and shadow someone at work. If you know someone who works at a plant and food or another Crown Research Institute, go in and say, can I just have a look at what you do, if you're allowed to, just so you can get a gauge for what they do, and then give yourself options. Have a plan A, have a plan B, and always be on the lookout for opportunities, because you just never know what it might lead you to.
Good advice. Good advice. So just flicking back to your interest in psychology, and it was really that interest in having in-depth and discussions just below the surface. As a scientist, how do you explain science or your role as a scientist to friends and family to really get that more in-depth discussion? And it's so topical, being able to communicate science effectively.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's really interesting. I don't know if you find this, because you're in a very similar field. When sometimes people ask you, what do? You kind of have to get a gauge for how interested they are in what you're going to say. So often you'll say, I work in science, and, oh, cool, what do? I'm an entomologist. They say, oh, what's that? Sometimes they'll know, sometimes they won't. And you can just kind of gauge by people's impressions on how much in depth you can go. Some people are super interested, and that's awesome. I mean, I tend to think sometimes I know nothing about someone's role, but I'd love to learn more. And you can offload to a very specific level. You can go into a lot of detail with them. But some people, you just kind of have to get an understanding of how much interest they have in your field, and how in depth you can go as to how much you're explaining what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So what are your aims for the future?
Oh, that's often a tough one. At the moment, our team in Hawke's Bay has changed quite a bit, and we've had a few people retiring, and so we have had a change in team dynamics, and that's kind of opened up opportunities to explore whether or not I want to take on certain roles. And so I guess my main goal for the future, I still really want to continue working in science. I think that'll always be a part of me. I very much would be interested in taking on different elements of the work, so being involved in different projects, not necessarily just pests, but work with beneficial insects, which we've started doing last season, and just, I guess, widen my scope. Been doing some work with other groups with visual imaging of blocks and how that applies to pest management, and I'd love to do more work with technology and just widen my horizons, basically. I think now that it's been 7, coming up 8 years, I feel more confident, I guess, as a person. You get to 30 and you kind of get to know yourself, and I'm just keen to expand on that and, see where it leads.
And is podcasting on the horizon?
It sure is, yes. So I'm hoping to, do some podcast interviews down in Hawke's Bay and get set up there and just pick the brains of some of the scientists that we have there, and anyone who's willing to share their cool stories and learn more about what they do. But yeah, that's absolutely on my radar. Would love to do some podcasting.
Excellent. So I realise we're just about out of time, so this is a short one. We're recording today on June 14th, which is Dell Day, named after the New Zealand botanist Dame Miriam Dell, and it's a day to recognise some of our scientific heroines. Is there a scientific heroine or heroines who has really inspired you in your career choice so far?
So I think that's a fantastic question. And what are the chances that we're recording on a day like this? So I'd have to say I don't have a specific person in mind, but I do definitely look up to a lot of people within PFR and in my life. Having my mum worked in science, to me, it's an absolute privilege to be a female in this field, and I think it has been very much encouraged to work in science, to have more females through. And I just feel very grateful to have had the opportunity, and I think there are many inspiring females in the field. It's wonderful to see that change over time. So to answer your question, I don't have one specific person, but certainly there are a lot of people in the field that are just incredibly inspiring women, and I work with a lot of them. Even my boss or colleagues who are working in this field. It's just, fantastic to be around them. So they're all inspiring, and it's a great day of recognition, I guess, for women to pursue a career in science.
And I think that's a great place to wrap up. Thank you, Anna, for taking us on your journey from Hungary to Havelock North, with some of the stops along the way, from psychology to native bees to codling moths. And I'm very much looking forward to listening to some of your podcasts uncovering stories from the Hawke's Bay.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you out there for listening. Please check out the Scigest pages on our Plant and Food website with extra links and to see our full catalogue of podcasts. Please follow or subscribe on our channel in iTunes or your favourite podcast provider. And to help this channel grow, please post a review and rate this podcast. Mā te wā, until next time.